My family thinks the local police will always protect them. They haven't met the federal agents building cases across 4 states. In my family, the men expected one daughter from each generation to live in our soundproof basement as the family punching bag. My grandfather built the room himself in 1962. He'd grown up watching his father hit his mother unconscious, watching his brothers terrorize their wives. So he invented what he called the feminist solution. One girl, chosen at 16, would absorb all the family's violence. The chosen one wore a locked silver anklet and lived in that basement 24/7. Whenever someone felt angry, stressed, or cruel, they had a designated target. My grandfather genuinely believed this protected other women in the family from random violence. 3 generations of men had grown up with this system. My father, my uncles, my older cousins, they'd all been taught from childhood that the basement girl existed for their anger. They'd accompany their fathers downstairs, learning which strikes left marks and which didn't. By adolescence, they had their own keys, and I would have called the police, but they scared me out of it. Instead of hearing bedtime stories as a child, they'd tell me stories about the foster care system, about how if I called the police, I'd end up there, where they'd rape me to death. And it's not like the women didn't participate in the feminist solution either. My grandmother selected the victims. My mother prepared the ankle ceremonies. My aunts delivered the meals through the slot, telling younger girls this was an honor and a necessity. They believed it. Without the anger room, they said, imagine how much worse things would be. I was 8 when my Aunt Sophia was chosen. I watched them lead her to the basement on her 16th birthday, watched her parents hand over their own daughter like a sacrifice. The tradition was specific. The girl served from age 16 until death or incapacitation. Then the next was chosen immediately. No gaps allowed. My grandmother kept meticulous records. Which girl served when, for how long, their performance ratings. She showed me once, proud of the organization. When I was 13, my Aunt Sophia was replaced with Elena. Every morning, my uncle visited before work. Wednesdays were my father's scheduled time. Weekends belonged to my grandfather. The women visited too, though less frequently. All the family's frustrations funneled into that room. It was around this time that I was finally smart enough to find something that changed everything. The heating vents connected every room in the house, and through them, I realized I could hear Elena begging. I heard the scheduled visits. I heard my grandmother explaining to my 9-year-old cousin Maya that she might be blessed with selection one day. That's when I started recording everything. 6 months of evidence hidden in the vents. I recruited 8 younger cousins who didn't want to be chosen. Nina mapped the ventilation system. Vera learned to pick locks. We dropped medical supplies to Elena and documented her injuries through the grates. The breaking point came at our annual Christmas dinner. My grandmother stood with the ceremonial selection bell. Elena had served well, she announced while pointing out her multiple severe injuries. It was time to choose her replacement. Her eyes settled on 9-year-old Maya, who smiled back, not understanding. I stood up and played 6 months of recordings through hidden speakers. The room erupted, but while family members screamed and tried to stop me, Vera had already called 911. The other girls formed a protective circle as evidence flooded the room. Audio of beatings, photos of the room, documentation going back decades. My family couldn't believe I'd betray the feminist solution. Even as police led them away, they insisted this system prevented worse violence. My grandmother kept repeating, we were protecting the family, one sacrifice to save many. But they'd been so confident in their tradition, so certain of their righteousness, they never imagined anyone would defy it. They fought until the end, hiring lawyers, claiming religious freedom, insisting the chosen girls volunteered. The arrests were quick and quiet. 17 family members were charged. That's when I truly realized how messed up our tradition really was. My family hired the best lawyers money could buy. 3 weeks later, we were in court. The judge reviewed all our evidence. Then he looked up with dead eyes. Case dismissed, he said. I saw it then, the scar on his wrist, the same mark all the men in my family wore. The scar caught the light as Judge Harrison gathered his papers. My hands shook as I watched him stand, watched my family members embrace their lawyers with relief flooding their faces. Elena swayed on her feet in the witness chair, her medical records scattered across the prosecutor's table like discarded trash. I grabbed the prosecutor's arm as he packed his briefcase. He yanked away without meeting my eyes, muttering something about jurisdiction issues. The bailiff ushered us toward the exit while my grandmother smiled triumphantly from across the courtroom. My father clapped my uncle's shoulder, both men already pulling out their phones. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around my family's legal team. I heard fragments of their statement about false accusations and troubled youth seeking attention. My cousins huddled near me, Nina's small hand gripping mine so tight her nails left marks. Vera kept glancing at the courthouse doors like she expected police to burst through and fix this impossible reversal. 3 hours later, my phone buzzed with photos from my aunt's social media. My entire family celebrated at Marcello's, their favorite Italian restaurant. Champagne glasses raised, my grandfather's arm around Judge Harrison's shoulders. The judge's silver bracelet glinted next to my grandfather's matching one. The caption read, "Justice prevails. Family stays strong." Elena collapsed in my apartment bathroom that night. The paramedics said her blood pressure had spiked dangerously high. As they loaded her onto the stretcher, she kept whispering about going back to the room, about how they'd make her pay for speaking up. I rode with her to the hospital, holding her hand while she drifted in and out of consciousness. The next morning brought 23 missed calls from unknown numbers. The first voicemail was just breathing. The second contained whispers about keeping family business private. By the 5th message, the voice clearly stated that some girls never learn their lessons. I changed my phone number that afternoon. 2 days passed in a blur of hospital visits and locked doors. Elena stabilized but refused to eat, convinced they'd poison her food. The younger cousin's parents had already started pulling them out of school, claiming family emergencies. Vera's mother showed up at my apartment demanding I stop filling her daughter's head with lies. The package arrived on the 3rd morning. No return address, just my name printed in block letters. Inside, photocopied bank statements spilled across my kitchen table. Monthly transfers from my grandfather's business account to Harrison Financial Consulting. 15 years of payments, always the same amount, always on the 1st of each month. Beneath the statements were photographs. Judge Harrison at my cousin's baptism wearing the ceremonial silver bracelet reserved for inner family. Harrison at my grandfather's 70th birthday, standing among the men who had keys to the basement. Harrison's signature on court documents dismissing 3 other cases my family had faced over the years. I drove straight to the district attorney's office. The secretary looked up from her desk, her fingers pausing over her keyboard. When I explained why I needed to see the DA urgently, she smiled apologetically. He was out of town indefinitely, she said. Family emergency. As she reached for her appointment book, her sleeve rode up. A thin silver chain circled her wrist, delicate but unmistakable. I backed out of the office, my evidence clutched against my chest. In the parking lot, my hands shook too badly to unlock my car. A security guard approached, asking if I needed assistance. His concerned expression seemed genuine until I noticed the silver tie clip shaped like our family crest. That night, my apartment windows shattered while I was at work. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, called to report the break-in, her voice trembling as she described the glass covering my living room floor. Nothing was stolen, but someone had left a photo on my coffee table. Elena in her hospital bed, taken from outside her room window. Nina called that evening, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. Her parents were sending her to live with our grandparents permanently. They said she needed discipline, needed to understand her place in the family structure. She begged me to help, but the line went dead before I could respond. When I called back, the number was disconnected. Vera's family moved her across state lines within 48 hours. Her last text simply said they were transferring her father's job immediately. No forwarding address, no way to contact her. The other cousins who'd helped me went silent one by one, their social media accounts deactivated, their phones disconnected. My bank called about suspicious activity on my accounts. Someone had reported potential fraud, triggering a freeze on all my assets. The investigation would take weeks, they explained, apologizing for the inconvenience. My credit card stopped working that same afternoon. Work became impossible when my supervisor called me in for a meeting. Anonymous complaints had flooded their inbox about my performance, my attitude, my reliability. The accusations were vague, but numerous enough to warrant suspension pending a full investigation. My supervisor seemed embarrassed, but insisted protocol had to be followed. With no money and no job, I called my friend Melissa. We'd known each other since college, and she'd always said her door was open. Her father Brian answered when I knocked, a solid man with sharp eyes who listened to my rushed explanation without interrupting. He guided me inside where Melissa wrapped me in a fierce hug. Brian Miller had been a private investigator for 30 years before retirement. He poured coffee while I spread my evidence across his dining table, his expression growing darker with each document. When I finished explaining, he pulled out a yellow legal pad and began making notes. This isn't the first time I've seen something like this, he said quietly. Never this organized, but the patterns are familiar. He disappeared into his home office, returning with boxes of old case files. Together, we spent hours cross-referencing names and dates. Judge Harrison's name appeared repeatedly, always dismissing cases involving prominent families, always with sealed records mentioning basement rooms or unexplained injuries. Over the next week, Brian made careful inquiries through his remaining law enforcement contacts. 12 similar cases over 2 decades, all dismissed by Harrison or judges connected to him. Each family had unexplained wealth. Each had young women who disappeared from public view. Each had properties with unusual modifications. We need more than paper trails, Brian explained one evening. We need the women who survived. Using his investigative skills, Brian tracked down 3 women from the dismissed cases. Sarah Chen, now 32, who'd escaped her family at 19. Maria Santos, 28, who testified about a locked room in her uncle's house. Jennifer Wu, 41, who tried to report her family's tradition when she was 16. We met at a coffee shop 2 towns over. The women entered separately, each scanning the room with the hypervigilance I recognized in myself. Sarah spoke first, her voice steady as she described her family's discipline room. Maria showed faded scars on her ankles from restraints. Jennifer pulled out photos of other girls who hadn't survived their family's traditions. They all protect each other, Jennifer explained. The judges, the police, the business owners, they marry between families, bind themselves with shared secrets. Each woman had evidence, photos, documents, medical records. More importantly, they had names. 15 families across 4 states, all connected through marriages and business partnerships, all maintaining their own versions of the tradition. The silver markings identified members, worn as jewelry or scarred into skin. Brian compiled our evidence into a comprehensive report. Federal crimes crossed state lines, he explained. Kidnapping, imprisonment, conspiracy. The federal courthouse operated outside local jurisdiction. We could bypass Harrison and his network entirely. The women created detailed affidavits while Brian prepared the filing. Each page documented years of abuse, naming specific individuals, providing dates and locations. Sarah's hands trembled as she signed her statement, but her jaw was set with determination. 2 weeks before our federal hearing date, my grandmother appeared at Melissa's front door. Brian answered, keeping his body between her and the interior of the house. She smiled warmly, claiming she wanted to reconcile with her granddaughter. When Brian didn't move, she pulled out a manila envelope. $2 million, she said loudly enough for me to hear from the kitchen. A trust fund for my granddaughter if she reconsiders this foolish path. I stepped into view, meeting her cold eyes. The warm grandmother act evaporated instantly. Her face twisted with disgust as I shook my head. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a hiss. You stupid girl. The tradition continues with or without you. We've already selected Nina as Elena's replacement. The ceremony is next week. My blood turned to ice. Nina was only 9 years old, the same age as Maya, but she'd helped me, made herself a target. I lunged forward, but Brian caught my arm, holding me back as my grandmother walked calmly to her car. We need a plan, Brian said firmly. If we act rashly, we lose everything. But I couldn't wait. That night, I drove to my grandparents' house, parking a block away. The basement window glowed faintly. Using skills Vera had taught me before she disappeared, I picked the lock on the cellar door. The familiar smell of damp concrete filled my nostrils as I descended. Nina sat in the corner of the soundproof room, a silver anklet already locked around her ankle. She looked up with hollow eyes, already beginning the dissociation that Elena had perfected. I rushed to her, examining the lock while she whispered about the ceremony, about how grandmother said it was an honor. Footsteps echoed overhead, multiple sets, moving with purpose. The ceremony was starting early. I pulled out my phone, starting a live stream on social media as I worked on the lock. The pics slipped in my sweaty hands while voices grew louder above us. The basement door opened just as the anklet clicked free. My father descended first, followed by my uncles and grandfather. They stopped short, seeing me crouched beside Nina. My phone continued recording, the live viewer count climbing rapidly. Step away from her, my grandfather commanded. I pulled Nina behind me, keeping the phone raised. Thousands of people are watching. They see everything. My uncle rushed forward. I dodged, but more family members poured down the stairs. Someone grabbed my wrist, trying to wrestle the phone away. Nina screamed as my aunt reached for her. The room erupted into chaos, bodies pushing and shoving in the confined space. Car doors slammed outside. Brian's voice boomed from the top of the stairs, accompanied by unfamiliar ones announcing themselves as federal marshals. The family members froze as agents in tactical gear flooded the basement, weapons drawn but not aimed. We've been monitoring this stream, the lead marshal announced. Everyone remain where you are. The arrests happened efficiently this time. Federal agents documented the room, photographed the ankle restraints, bagged evidence with practiced precision. They'd been building their own case since our filing, Brian explained later. My live stream provided the probable cause they needed for immediate intervention. The federal trial began 6 months later. Without local interference, the full scope emerged. 15 families maintaining abuse traditions for generations, protected by place judges and officials throughout the system. Each family contributed to a shared fund that paid for legal protection and silence. Judge Harrison's arrest made headlines when investigators found detailed records in his home safe. 3 other judges fell with him, along with 2 police chiefs and numerous city officials. They all bore the silver markings. All participated in protecting the network. My family received sentences ranging from 20 years to life. My grandfather would die in prison, as would my father. The grandmother who'd selected victims for decades received 40 years. The other families faced similar fates as survivors came forward, emboldened by our success. Elena spent months in therapy, slowly reclaiming pieces of herself. The younger cousins were placed with carefully vetted foster families who understood trauma. Nina lived with a family 2 states away, but we video called weekly, watching her slowly learn to smile again. I returned to school for my social work degree, focusing on family trauma and cult dynamics. My desk at the internship displayed one photo, Nina and me outside the federal courthouse the day we testified, both of us finally free from the silver anklets that once marked us as future victims. The family house was seized during asset forfeiture. Federal investigators spent weeks examining the property. In the sub-basement behind a wall my grandfather had built, they found remains. 8 women dating back to the 1960s, the ones who hadn't hadn't survived their selection. Their families had been told they'd run away. Letters arrived monthly from various prisons. My relatives called me traitor, destroyer, ungrateful child. I kept them all, filed neatly in a box labeled evidence of no remorse. They served as reminders that breaking the silence hadn't just saved Nina and Elena. It saved generations of girls who would never know that Soundproof Room existed. Brian helped me understand that true courage meant facing systems larger than yourself. The network had seemed invincible, protected by power and tradition. But evidence, persistence, and federal law had brought them down. Every family's secret room now stood empty, their traditions finally broken. My phone rang constantly with calls from survivors in other states, women who'd seen the trial coverage and recognized their own family's patterns. I guided them to resources, connected them with attorneys who wouldn't be bought. The network had been vast, but so was the community of survivors rising to dismantle it. Some nights, I still heard echoes of Elena's cries through imagined vents, but then I'd remember Nina's laugh during our last call, or see another survivor's testimony bring down another family's tradition. The rooms were empty now. The silver anklets melted down as evidence. The cycle broken by women who refused to let it continue.